Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday and we are continuing to roll through NFL divisional previews. On Tuesday, we talked Eagles and Cowboys. Today, we are finishing up the NFC East by looking at the New York Giants and the Washington Commanders. Dennis, how was the rest of your week?
You know, it's just been busy, which has been good. I got to meet Calvin Johnson and Cam Jordan yesterday. It was a little bit anticlimactic because, you know, as a lifelong Lions fan, meeting Calvin Johnson, it was something I was looking forward to. But he basically walked out of the hotel on his phone and was on his phone the entire ride to the airport. And, you know, he did mouth thank you to me as I was handing him his luggage, but, you know, that was about it. Cam Jordan was nice. I mean, Calvin wasn't not nice. He just was preoccupied trying to make a deal on something.
Yeah, you know, sometimes those kind of things happen. But at least you got to meet him and see him. So could be worse.
It could be worse.
Well, Dennis, one piece of news that I thought was interesting and of note, Anthony Richardson, you know, we have a lot of hopes for him coming back here in year two. We saw some flashes in a couple of the games he got to play as a rookie, but really cut short due to injury. So I know a lot of us are excited to see what he can do, not just on the field, but for our fantasy teams. So it's not a great sign, perhaps, that in OTAs he is being held out due to shoulder soreness. Are you starting to get a little concerned, or you know, you want to see if this persists into July?
Yeah, it's a wait and see for me. He's a guy coming off an injury, so it isn't like he's been working on football stuff for the last 9 months while he's been injured. He's been, you know, having to rehab his injury and get right. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that it's, you know, just a getting back in the groove of things blip.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Shoulder, I don't think it was a shoulder injury, right? Didn't he tear his ACL?
Yeah, something.
So, kind of interesting. This time of year, you can probably just roll with it. If we start getting these reports, I don't know, in training camp in July and in August, I might start getting a little bit concerned because, you know, a lot of our hopes, not just for Richardson in fantasy, but even for the whole kind of Colts team, is predicated on the idea of him kind of coming back healthy and ready to go. And that would not be a spectacular sign to me. We shall see. Speaking of quarterbacks who are trying to work their way back, as we begin the second half of the NFC East, we will be taking a look at the New York Giants first. In 2023, they finished 6-11. Third in the NFC East. They were third in the NFC East in 2022, but that was a 9-7 finish that was good enough for the playoffs. Dennis, I'll be honest, I actually thought I remembered them finishing worse. When I saw 6-11, I think that's better than I remembered them finishing, considering they started the year pretty woefully getting like historically blown out few of the first few weeks of the season. Key departures: Saquon Barkley is gone, went to the Philadelphia Eagles. Tyrod Taylor is gone, went to the New York Jets. Darren Waller, I'm putting him in the key departures because everything we're getting right now is that it seems like he's going to retire. I haven't seen him officially announce it, but they are certainly bracing and expecting it. And then Paris Campbell, their wide receiver addition last year, didn't do a lot for them in 2023, is now with the Philadelphia Eagles as well. Key additions: they picked up Drew Lock to add to the quarterback room. They picked up Devin Singletary to kind of help lead the running back room. They picked up Isaiah McKenzie, Miles Boykin, Allen Robinson to add some depth to the wide receiver room, and Chris Manhertz at tight end. In the draft, they also hammered some fantasy relevant positions, grabbing Malik Neighbors with their top pick, a wide receiver. They grabbed Theo Johnson, a tight end, in the middle of the draft when real rumors about Waller retiring started to bubble up. And they also grabbed another running back in Tyrone Tracy Jr. In 2023, fantasy finishes were not great, Bob, especially when you talk about the passing offense. Daniel Jones, who was limited to just 6 games where he went 1-5 as a starter, finished as QB 44. Tommy DeVito, who remains on the roster, likely a third stringer, actually finished as QB 34, was probably the best of their QBs. Barkley finished as running back 13, but their new lead back, Devin Singletary, finished as running back 32 for the Houston Texans. Wide receiver, not a lot to write home about there either. Darius Slayton was the best of the group at wide receiver 46. Wan'Dale Robinson peaked up a little bit, wide receiver 53. Darren Waller actually finished as tight end 22. I didn't remember him being that productive, so I was kind of interested about that finish. But Dennis, how are you feeling about this team from a fantasy perspective?
So I find myself with the overwhelming urge to go buy dirt cheap shares of Daniel Jones. They just added Malik Neighbors. I think Jalen Hyatt's going to provide a deep threat. Bellinger will be a reasonable safety valve. They won't have Saquon Barkley, so there isn't that one guy that's going to save you. So everybody's going to need to step up. Their real issue was their offensive line. So if their offensive line can come together, I think guys like Singletary and Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson looked really good out of the slot once he got healthy. Jalen Hyatt brings something that nobody else on that team does, which, Darius Slayton kind of did. He's pretty fast, kind of a one-trick pony, deep threat, as I say that out loud. But, I'm not expecting anything out of Allen Robinson or Isaiah McKenzie or Miles Boykin. But Devin Singletary is, and we'll have an article coming out over at Dynasty Nerds in the next day or so about bargain bin bell cows. And Devin Singletary is set up to be a bargain bin bell cow. I think it was John Hansen on Sirius XM said that, we haven't really paid attention, but Singletary has put up between like 950 and 1150 yards every season of his career, not just rushing, but combined. He's a reasonably good pass catcher. He's not elite in that area, but he is good enough. And he just kind of is a lunch pail guy that comes in. And so would I be surprised if Singletary finishes as a solid RB2, RB20, RB19? I'm not going to be surprised at that at all. We've seen the Tyrone Tracy experiment before with Antonio Gibson and Tony Pollard, and there's merit to it. There's some value to it, but I think Singletary is just that guy that's going to come to work every day, professional running back, do the right thing. So I'm okay rostering him as my, ideally my RB3. But if I have to have him and somebody very similar as my RB 2 and 3, then I'm okay trying to figure out which one of them to play, see how things go in season.
I have a lot of teams where I have apparently him and Zach Moss as my 2-3 options.
Yeah, he and Moss, like when I dropped a note in the editorial chat and said, "Hey, I need somebody to write this bargain bin bell cow article," Zach Moss was a guy I mentioned as well. So, these are guys that I think we can look at getting 250, 275 touches.
Well, and here, so Barkley I mentioned was RB13 last year. Here's actually his stat line. It's not as huge as you might have thought. He had 247 carries, 962 yards rushing, had 41 receptions for 280 yards receiving. I think what helped prop him up is he had 6 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns, but I don't think that's too far out of bounds for Devin Singletary.
Yeah, if he can put up, 1,100 yards, 40 catches, 1,100 total yards, 1,200 total yards, 40 catches, and 6 or 7 touchdowns.
So last year he had 898 yards rushing. He was only 64 back of Barkley, and he had 30 receptions for 193 yards, only 11 receptions and about 80 yards off, or about 90 yards off on the passing too. So they weren't that far apart, I guess, when you look at it. The big difference, only 4 total touchdowns for Singletary, 10 total touchdowns for Barkley.
Yeah. So there's something to work with there. 2 years ago, we all felt like the Giants were playing really well, and we said repeatedly on this show, we think they're a year early. And last year just fell apart. We see stuff like that all the time. One year teams will outperform what we think they're going to do, and then the next year they kind of fall apart and underperform. Jones getting hurt and being hurt virtually all season on top of playing poorly. He's playing for his NFL career right now. And he's in a system where he's been for going into his 3rd or 4th season now with Daboll.
With Daboll, it's got to be his 3rd season with Daboll.
So he knows the system. I think Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, and Malik Neighbors is a decent enough pass catching group that if the line can keep him reasonably safe, like just put him middle of the pack in sacks, QB pressures.
Yeah, so Daniel Jones started 6 games last year. He was sacked 30 times in those 6 games, only 909 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions really kind of sunk him. Tommy DeVito also made 6 starts, was sacked 37 times in those 6 starts, but did throw for 1,101 yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Tyrod Taylor started 5 games, was sacked 17 times. And you would say maybe because he was more mobile, but Daniel Jones still ended up as the leading quarterback rusher with 206 rushing yards and a touchdown, 197 for Taylor, 195 for DeVito. So they weren't all that dissimilar in what they did on the ground, but Taylor must have gotten the ball out a lot quicker because he had the most pass attempts and the most completions among the group despite starting 1 fewer game, and the most yards. 1,341 yards, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He was actually QB 36. So I mentioned DeVito was 34. He was 36. Which quarterback do you think finished 35, sandwiched between them?
36, 35. I am going to go with Mac Jones.
Mac Jones was actually QB 30. Deshaun Watson was QB 35.
I can see it. So before we came on the air, I was talking to you about I've got a rookie draft tomorrow where I've got Anthony Richardson and I've got the 102 and the 103. And Daniel Jones being a guy that I may be interested in adding cheaply as my QB3. This is the perfect kind of team that I would take that shot on. I'm going to get Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels with one of these two picks at the 102 or 103. I may get both of them if Marvin Harrison goes at the 101, which, looking at the guy at 101, the quarterbacks he has, there's a strong chance he might go Marvin Harrison. And then it's an Ohio-centric league as well. So with Harrison being a Buckeye. But if I'm rolling with Richardson and Caleb Williams, or Richardson and Jaden Daniels, adding Daniel Jones cheap isn't a bad strategy, I don't think, to kind of hedge your bets. I just don't think there's anybody on the Giants team right now that is a threat to take the starting job.
So you don't put any stock into the kind of rumors that we've heard bubble up that it's going to be an open competition with Drew Lock?
I mean, yeah. Do I put stock in those rumors? I put stock in that they are rumors. Yeah.
I honestly forgot Tommy DeVito played better than I remembered. 8 touchdown passes and 6 starts and had 1,100 yards. I mean, he had the same number of starts as Daniel Jones. He took more sacks. But
so DeVito is your classic small sample size developmental guy, as in, he comes out hot, nobody knows who he is, great story, he's getting some shit done. And then as teams get a couple games on tape, they're like, oh, yeah, we can stop this joker. And, things kind of went downhill a little bit for DeVito.
Let's talk the passing group for a minute. I'm pulling up there. So Wan'Dale Robinson was actually their leader in receptions. He wasn't the strongest fantasy finisher, but he had 78 targets, caught 60 for 525, only 1 touchdown. Slayton, 79 targets, led them in that category, 50 receptions, 770 yards, 4 touchdowns. Darren Waller, who only played 11 games. And actually, that's the other thing. No Giants receiver, it looks like, appeared. I guess they appeared in all of them. They just didn't start them all. Darren Waller started 11 games, 74 targets, 52 receptions, 52 touchdowns would be a lot. 552 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Hyatt, you mentioned you were kind of interested to see what he can do in his second year. Only 40 targets, caught 23, so not a great percentage catch rate there. 373 yards, got no touchdowns. Isaiah Hodgins, a guy who's still on the roster, had 33 targets, caught 21 for 230 and 3 touchdowns. Daniel Bellinger, who we think may end up getting the first crack at tight end, 28 targets, 25 receptions, 255 yards. So I think Malik Neighbors probably becomes a central focus there. No Giants receiver had more than 79 targets last year. Barkley had 60. So if you throw him into the mix, they had 3 guys with 70-plus targets, 79 for Slayton, 78 for Robinson, 74 for Waller, and then 60 for the running back. Barkley, I don't know if I expect them to be a lot more high volume of a passing offense. So what kind of are you shooting for that receiver group?
So I like Neighbors as a potential low-end wide receiver too. He's got wide receiver. He's got top 10 ability, I think. I just think that it'll be a situation where Jones is still going to be trying to get to know Neighbors and Hyatt because he didn't play most of last season. He's got a new running back in Singletary. The offense is the same scheme over the last 3 years, so there is that comfort. But I feel like Slayton leading them with 79 targets, starting 13 games. He led the wide receivers in starts. I don't think that happens this year. I think it's going to be Hyatt, Neighbors, and Robinson, with Hyatt being in that Darius Slayton role. Him and Slayton and Hyatt are kind of the same guy. Neighbors will be the alpha, and Wandale will be the slot guy. So I think Wandale is a PPR wide receiver 3 guy, full PPR. I think he's somebody that could get 90 targets, but he's going to average 10 yards of reception. Will he be able to convert touchdowns, say like Hunter Renfrow did as a slot guy? That's open. It's going to be open to the opportunity. I think they'll force it to Malik Neighbors some, and then they'll take deep shots with Hyatt, and Slayton will be their wide receiver 4. Bellinger is going to be a short area guy, safety valve guy. Waller had 74 targets and Bellinger 28, so right around 100 for the top 2 tight ends. I think the top 2 tight ends this season probably are going to be 80 targets combined.
Well, and I think Waller is a little bit of an outlier when you're talking about him just as a tight end, because he was kind of the big move they made in the passing game last year. I think he was a featured part of the passing offense that, I would tend to agree with you more. Probably Neighbors, Hyatt, and Wandale will be a little bit more featured there. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bellinger is more in the 50 to 60 target range.
So interestingly enough, I just moved back to the season before, and Slayton led them in targets that season also, but at 71 targets. And then if you go back even further, one more year, Galladay led them in targets with 76. Ingram, the tight end, had 73. So they've been, with Ingram and Waller, they've kind of been tight end centric, and almost by default, it's been Darius Slayton, I guess just because he stayed healthy.
Well, and I wouldn't totally rule out Slayton being a starter over Hyatt still, and having it be Neighbors and Slayton with Wandale mixing in there, and them using Hyatt to take deep shots. I mean, that's kind of a little bit the way it looked like they were trying to do it last year.
Well, and Slayton is making decent money. He's not at OTAs right now.
I think they just. Oh yeah, that's right. He's trying to get a new contract, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he's 26, but it feels like he's been in the league. He's going into his 6th season, so he's on his 2nd contract.
But I mean, he has been somewhat reliable for them in a middling kind of pass offense. He led them in receiving touchdowns. He and Barkley each had 4.
I think he's been historically a wide receiver 4 or 5 kind of guy, just because he doesn't get the volume.
Right where he was, 46.
Right. So and I think bringing Neighbors in, he's not going to get a spike in volume. So right now, I'm a little leery of him just because they're going into the season healthy. With Wandale healthy, it had been Sterling Shepard, whom you could always count on to get injured. And so Slayton would get some opportunity. I think they've tried to make Slayton a backup the last couple of years, and just nobody in front of him stays healthy. And so he kind of ends up being the starter. I think this year he's probably going to split time more evenly with Hyatt and end up maybe in the 60 target range. So probably more comfortable as a wide receiver 5 for him. Hyatt, I think, is too best bally. I'm going to, he might be a guy that if I acquire, I want him as my wide receiver 7 or 8, so I can sit him on my bench and see if he develops.
So I guess the big question, where do you think the Giants finish this year?
Well, Matthew, let me see. Where did I put them? They ended up, after all things considered, 4-12 in my quick and dirty. rankings.
So you must be missing a game, because I think it would be
Probably.
5 and 12, which is actually where I had them as last place in the NFC East. We didn't do that well for them with the power rankings. I don't love their quarterback room. I think Singletary could be an interesting fantasy pickup, but they don't have a ton behind them. I mean, Eric Gray, I know you're kind of a little bit excited about, but 17 carries for 48 yards last year is not an incredible sample size. And I don't know that they improve their defense that much. So let me ask you, if they finish bottom of the NFC East again and only in the 5-win range, does Brian Daboll start to get in trouble?
Yeah, I think they've got to show signs of becoming a winner. I had the game I missed on them was week 16 at Atlanta, and I'm giving that one to Atlanta.
Yeah, so you're even less bullish than me. The Giants were a nice surprise 2 years ago. Last year, I thought they'd be better, but we really saw the seams. And some of the dissension behind the scenes, with Daboll and Wink Martindale, was not great. There's a lot that they need to do to get back on track. But really, I don't feel like they've built a very good team the last couple of years either. Daniel Jones may actually have his best set of receivers he's ever had. And still, when we were doing power rankings, we have them near the bottom. I like Malik Neighbors, but it's not an incredible group.
I mean, they have been abysmal at evaluating offensive linemen. Like even Andrew Thomas, who now people are like, oh, he's good. His first year or two wasn't good. He put the work in. Evan Neal is going to have to do that this offseason because he was horrific last year. And I don't know. That was rough.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. The final team in the NFC East in our assessment is the Washington Commanders. Last year, the final year of Ron Rivera, the team went through a sale in the offseason, had kind of a middling energy, and that really launched them into the season. They were sometimes fun to watch for some of the production that they put up on offense, but they were not a good team. Earned them the second overall pick in the draft. They finished 4-13, bottom of the East. Key departures: they cleared out the quarterback room. Sam Howell was traded to the Seahawks. Jacoby Brissett now with the Patriots. Antonio Gibson, a pretty productive running back for them, also went to the Patriots. Curtis Samuel, the wide receiver, left and went to Buffalo. And Logan Thomas was released. We thought he might retire. Now he is with the 49ers. Additions: they brought in Marcus Mariota at quarterback. He comes over from 1-year stint with the Eagles, likely to be the veteran mentor there. Austin Eckler coming over from the Chargers adds to a running back room. And now Cliff Kingsbury running the offense, Anthony Lynn helping coordinate the running game. Maybe a little interesting there. They added Olamide Zaccheaus and Jamison Crowder, a couple of vets to the wide receiver room, and they added a veteran tight end in Zach Ertz, who actually played with Kingsbury in Arizona. But they made some big splashes in the draft, grabbing Jaden Daniels at the number 2 overall pick, probably going to be their starter and franchise quarterback. Luke McCaffrey came along in the 3rd round at wide receiver, and in the 2nd round they grabbed a tight end in Ben Stinnett, who could be the future there. A very interesting platoon now setting up with him and Ertz. Fantasy finishes: a year ago, Sam Howell was actually QB 12, a little bit better than maybe we remembered. Brian Robinson, who remains on the team, finished as running back 21. Antonio Gibson was actually running back 39, now with the Patriots. Eckler, who comes over, was running back 26 last year with the Chargers. At wide receiver, they have Terry McLaurin, who was wide receiver 31. Jahan Dotson, wide receiver 56. I was kind of interested the wide receivers didn't have a better year, considering Howell finished a lot better. But Logan Thomas, actually very productive at tight end, finished as tight end 16 last season. So, Dennis, what is kind of your fantasy expectation for a team that is really starting over under new head coach Dan Quinn, kind of turning over quarterback, running back? They've completely turned over their tight end room. They turned over their coordinators. It's hard to use last year as much of a template at all for what to expect this year.
Yep. Big changes afoot in Washington. I got to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous. Jahan Dotson 2 seasons ago came out of the gate hot, looked like a touchdown machine. Was kind of overtaken last season by De'Ami Brown, who was a 3rd-round pick in 21. Brown's kind of just a guy. Dotson's listed as the starter, and then they've already slotted, according to our lads, Luke McCaffrey in as their slot receiver after he played 3 seasons of quarterback in college and a season and a half at wide receiver. I get it. His name is McCaffrey. He's probably going to be able to figure it out. His dad was one of the best receivers in the NFL for a couple seasons out there in Denver. And I think McCaffrey will be
the Giants and with the 49ers before that. Won a Super Bowl with the 49ers.
I think Luke McCaffrey will be fine. I don't know if this season he's going to be better than Olamide Zaccheaus. I don't know that he's going to be better than Dax Milne, to be honest. Milne is a Liam Neeson kind of guy. He's got a very specific set of skills, which is crazy that they got him backing up Terry McLaurin, because it ain't that set of skills that Milne has. He's seems like a very typical slot guy. I like the Zach Ertz mentoring Ben Sinnott. I wasn't as high on Sinnott as some, but he could be very good, and they may go 2 tight ends. They've, like John Bates, Cole Turner's flashed a little bit here and there. It'll all come down to what does Jaden Daniels do and how fast does he do it? I think Eckler looked toast last year. He did not look good running the ball. I feel like Eckler will, while they list him as the starter, he's going to be in that Antonio Gibson role.
So I'll give you Gibson's stats from last year. And I think Eckler could be a step up from that. Gibson only carried 65 times, 178 carries for Brian Robinson Jr. That feels about right. Chris Rodriguez actually had 51 carries last year, so maybe even a little more carries for both those guys. But Gibson, 65 for 265 and a touchdown on the ground, saw 59 targets, caught 48 for 389 and 2 touchdowns. Brian Robinson actually saw 43 for 36 receptions, 368 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, they could end up more of an even split there. That might make more sense to me, in which case, last year Robinson was 21 and Gibson was 39. I could see a place where they both end up kind of low 20s.
Yeah, it feels like they're each going to get a 65-35 split. Eckler's going to get 65% of the passing game and 35% of the ground game. Robinson's going to get 65% of the ground game and 35% of the passing game. And if we shave a little bit off, then Rodriguez gets some. If, you cut a total of, 10% off of the 2 of them. So it feels like they're going to be fairly defined, but I think Robinson showed last year he was a little better receiver than he was given credit for. And maybe Eckler bounces back in this offense. I like Ertz as the mentor to Sinnott. Ertz is also a good 2-way tight end, so he's an effective blocker. Will Tyler Badass step up as he's getting older? Andrew Wiley and Sam Cosmi on the right side, Nick Allegretti and Cornelius Lucas on the left side. If that line holds up well and gives Jaden Daniels a chance, I don't see any reason Marcus Mariota should be playing. He's a fantastic athlete, but since his arm injury in Tennessee, he clearly has never regained confidence in that arm, and he's just not accurate throwing the ball. I think Jeff Driscoll, their third stringer, is not very good. And Sam Hartman is a college free agent with a lot to prove. So it really comes down to being all on Jaden Daniels' shoulders. And if you look at Daniels' college tape, good passer, very good passer. Having Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors can make that look good. And a really good athlete, but he does a terrible job protecting himself when he runs. It's amazing to watch some of these great athletes, and they just don't know how to fall down.
Well, this is kind of what I wonder too about, so Kingsbury, when he came in, was head coach in Arizona, obviously had Kyler Murray. And, we always thought there were passing weapons and they were running kind of an up-tempo offense. But as I've pointed out before, Murray has never had a 4,000-yard passing season. So you got to kind of wonder. Last year, Howell was QB 12, as I mentioned, 65 sacks in 17 games. They hopefully, they would like to clean that up. He also did not hit 4,000 yards last year. He threw the ball 612 times, only 39.46 yards, 21 touchdowns, 21 interceptions. Howell, though, only ran 48 times, did rush for 263 yards and 5 touchdowns, was tied for the lead in rushing touchdowns. That is another place where I wonder if Brian Robinson Jr. gets a little bit of a hit, because if Jaden Daniels is more of a prolific rusher, we have kind of seen that impact running backs in Buffalo with Josh Allen. The passing down running back does a little bit better, in which case it might make more sense that they view Eckler more as a starter, because they're getting a lot more running out of another place.
Right. Yeah, it's tough because I love Terry McLaurin's ability. He's such a good pass catcher, but even now he came into the league a little bit older. Let me see, what is he? He'll be 29 in September. So going to an offense that, maybe it'll be good because they have like the DeAndre Hopkins type of player where it's, we've got one main guy and that becomes McLaurin. That doesn't bode well for Dotson or McCaffrey. But
I think the big loss last year, you mentioned De'Ami Brown, but he only saw 23 targets, caught 12 passes for 168. The big pieces that probably ate into Dotson. So McLaurin saw 132 targets last year, 79 receptions, 1,002 yards, 4 touchdowns. I would think 132 targets is about on par.
Right.
Samuel, who's gone, saw 91 targets, caught 62 for 613, also 4 touchdowns. Dotson saw 83, only caught 49 for 518 and 4 touchdowns. Actually had the worst yards per reception between him and McLaurin. I would have thought, it seemed like prior Dotson was kind of a down the field guy, but that's not how they appeared to use him last year. Tight end, 78 targets for Logan Thomas, 55 receptions for 496 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I think the question, 91 targets for Curtis Samuel, how does that get divided between McCaffrey and Dotson?
And Eckler.
Well, but I mean, running backs last year got, 112 targets combined. So I don't think that they need more targets going there. I would believe that Eckler might take more of the targets away from Brian Robinson. Robinson saw 43, Gibson saw 59. I wouldn't be incredibly shocked if it was more like 70-30.
I still feel like Robinson will have 35, 38 targets. I just think Eckler will be closer to 75, maybe 80. So I think he'll siphon off some of those wide receiver targets. Who knows? Could be wrong. Brand new offense. We can speculate based on what he did in Arizona, but
Well, and I was trying to think. I don't feel like Arizona had in any of the offenses with King. We remember DeAndre Hopkins. I don't remember them having a strong number 2 receiver in many of those years either. So maybe it just bodes poorly for both McCaffrey and Dotson. Dotson was an interesting pick when it was made. He started better, you're right, in the rookie year than I think some of us thought he would. The last year, he was a tough play.
So let's see. Last season, Marquise Brown had 101 targets in Arizona.
Last season, Kingsbury wasn't there.
That's right. It was Gannon. Okay. Let's go back another year. And so then Marquise Brown had 107. DeAndre Hopkins, 96.
But Hopkins that year, I believe, was suspended for 6 games.
Yeah, he only played 9 games. Well, and Brown only played 12 games.
You probably have to go a little further back because I think in that 22 season.
All right, so we go back even further.
2021 was the year they made the playoffs. So
Christian Kirk had 103. See, this would have been in 21. They were 11-6 in 2021.
And they made the
Kirk
playoffs.
had 103. AJ Brown had 92. Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins 64 each.
They didn't have AJ Brown. It had to have been Hollywood.
Or AJ Green.
Okay. I was going to say, so that's right. They had AJ Green. So that's before they even acquired Hopkins.
No, because the year before they had Hopkins, he had 160 targets. Hopkins was injured that year.
Oh, in 2021. Okay, so you said 103 for Kirk. So 2021's not even it's been a long time since they had a healthy set group of receivers. So but that AJ Green, so what was the breakdown in 2020? So 103 for Kirk, how many for Green?
Well, we can go back even to 2020 with Kingsbury, where Hopkins had 160, Christian Kirk had 79, Larry Fitzgerald had 72. Then we'll go back to 21, and the breakdown was Kirk with 103, AJ Green with 92, Zach Ertz 81, Rondale Moore 64, DeAndre Hopkins 64 in 10 games. The next wide receiver was Antoine Wesley with 32.
So if you combine 650, so it may not be that far off to assume that you would see like 140 targets for McLaurin and still get around 100 targets for Dotson, and then 85 at the tight end, 70 something for Eckler. And
in 21, Chase Edmonds had 53 and James Conner had 39. So that was
so they're still going around 100 targets at running back.
Yeah. So
that'll be
maybe we're selling them short.
Well, I think a lot of it too, like you said, depends on how does Daniels develop as a passer. But I mentioned Kyler Murray has never had a 4,000-yard season either, so you could get quite a bit of production. It seems like from without breaking the bank in yardage.
So I think McLaurin's probably going to be a high-end to mid wide receiver 2. Dotson probably a low-end 2 to mid 3. If we can get him close to 100 targets, probably a mid wide receiver 3. I'm not betting on McCaffrey. Draft him, put him on my taxi squad. Let's see what happens.
I'm also not betting on a top 20 tight end finish necessarily for any of them, because I think Ertz is older, and I do think they will end up splitting.
Yeah, so Ertz is entering his Jason Witten years.
There you go. So how do you feel like the Commanders are going to do? They've invested a lot in kind of building a new roster.
So going through my quick and dirty one loss, I ended up with the Commanders. Where'd they go? Oh, I'm missing one. So I got them at 4-12. So they're either going to be 4-13 or 5-12.
So you're not real bullish on them either, and this is where we're going to have something of a split with their schedule. And I kind of like some of the moves that they made. I thought they were possibly a little better of a team than their record indicated last year with the way they played in some of those games. I have them at 9-8. So I think like an 8 or 9 win season for them and the Bears is not really out of the realm of possibility.
So it's not the players that give me pause. I don't think Dan Quinn is a winning builder. I think he did okay in Atlanta. Maybe he got lucky with Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. But I don't think he was there when they were those two were even drafted. I think he inherited them. I'm not sold on Quinn as the top dog. I think I buy him pretty well as a defensive coordinator. And then you bring in Kingsbury, who's, to put it politely, offenses have gotten mixed reviews. We'll see if he does better as only the offensive coordinator versus being the head coach. But if you go all the way back to his college coaching days, Kingsbury, for all the accolades he gets as being this offensive genius, his teams have not performed great, Bob.
So Dan Quinn had a horrendous final year. The Falcons were 0-5 and fired him mid-year. But what do you think his overall record with 5 years and 5 games was with the Falcons?
So 5 years and 5 games. So that's what, 50, 80, 87,
85 games. He played
85 games. I think his record was probably like 40. I think he's probably 47, 48 wins.
Oh, you're a little higher than that. He was 43 and 42, and
okay,
almost every year. So he was 8-8 first year, 11-5 took him to the Super Bowl in 2016, 10-6 in 2017, then 7-9, 7-9, and they started out 0-5. So if you peeled the last year off of his record, he would have been 43 and 37 in 2 years. He's always kind of right around 500 pretty much with those. And I feel like that's a lot of where we are in the league in general this year, so I wouldn't be shocked to see like a 7-9 win range for the Commanders and have them win 8 or 9 games. I think, if he can get the defense going, he paired himself with a good offensive coordinator, just like at the beginning of his Falcons days, he had Kyle Shanahan. And I think Kingsbury is a decent offensive coordinator. So is Anthony Lynn, some decent offensive minds that maybe aren't the greatest at game management. So let's see how it goes for him. That'll do it for us today. That brings the NFC East to a close, but don't worry. Next week we will stay in the East and we will just move over to the AFC. So on Tuesday we will be talking Bills and Dolphins, which were the top 2 teams in the AFC East last season. Dennis, if people are feeling a little bored and a little lonely this weekend, how can they fill their time?
So they can do what I'm going to do. So tomorrow afternoon, I got to drive to Indianapolis. Black Powder has a show at Long Shot Indy. If you're a Hoosier out there, you're somewhere around Indianapolis, get out to Long Shot Indy last night and rock, or tomorrow night and rock out with some Black Powder. But I'm going to pop in a little fantasy football roundtable podcast, listen to these terrible words I'm saying, and give myself a rating and a review. You should do the same, whether you're mowing your yard, taking the wife shopping, taking yourself shopping, at the kid's birthday party. Give us a rate, give us a review. Hop on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe.
It will certainly help us out. We will look forward to that. We'll look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday. Until then, have a wonderful weekend.